IVM.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Uncle Please Sit. My name is Tushar Chandnani and with me as always is host and co-host and host Joel Pereira. How's it going, Joel?
Hi Tushar, what's up?
Bus, same thing that has been up for the last 6 months, sitting at home doing nothing.
And this is getting little boring, no? Nothing changes.
I think after a point it's just we're gonna go to Captain's Log. Corona.
Yeah.
5,000 doing nothing.
You do Captain Log, I'll be curled into a corner and basically scratching my teeth.
Yeah. So on that great note, we would like to introduce our guest for this episode of the podcast. We would like all of you to welcome our special guest, Sonali Gupta. Sonali Gupta, how are you?
I'm doing fine. Yes.
Excellent.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah. So, for our listeners, we'd like to inform you that Sonali is a clinical psychologist who's worked in the field for over 16 years. She's written a book on anxiety, published by HarperCollins, which we will be talking about also. And she works with young adults, young adults, couples, teenagers. And interesting enough, she also consults with Tinder, which obviously we will be talking about at some point. How's it going, Sonali?
Yes, I am doing fine, as good as one can be with the pandemic.
And how have you coped with the last 6 months? Because you have double coping, right? You're coping for yourself and your patients.
So I think, like everyone else, in March, I thought this is going to be just a couple of months. So while clients kept having emergencies, I think one kept working around it.
Yeah.
I think now in the last 2 months, I've learned to slow down personally, pause far more, set better boundaries. And I think the clients also, April, May, a lot of people saw it as a pause or they were, feeling overwhelmed, both extremes.
Yeah.
And I think now people are far more frustrated, claustrophobic, also irritated, right? And helpless at a different level. So I think as a therapist, this is a challenging time.
All right. So
because you want to go out and meet your friends, but at the same time, you don't want to die.
Yeah.
So it's like, what do I do today? Should I go out and meet my friends or go to work and do all the normal things I've been doing for 35 years? Or do I die?
Yes,
and it's a perpetual limbo, right? This limbo is not ending. We all are suspended in this limbo.
Yeah, I think it's the unpredictability that makes it worse. No, I think just the inability to know what is going to happen. When is this ending? So,
every time when you leave the house, I also, you go, as much as I try to minimize going outside, sometimes you just need to go down to get a loaf of bread or a dozen eggs or, something stupid. And every time and there are times, where I'll walk out of the house, I'll forget to get my mask. And then I'm looking around to see if there are any people around me, who have infected me in this brief time between the first floor and the ground floor.
No, I'm just going through weird nostalgia. I'm just I'll be driving around. I used to drive on this road regularly. But now I'm not driving on this road at all. Damn it.
Oh, talking about nostalgia, you know what I have done? So on your phone, I have an Android phone. So you have Google Photos.
Yeah.
And Google Photos has this bastard habit of reminding you what you were doing 2 years this week, 4 years this week. And man, this time last year, I was in the US on a holiday. So, and I was there for 2 months. So since August, I turned it off because all through August, it was hi, at this time last year, you were in Boston eating lobster. And I'm no, I don't want to remember this.
So this is a good segue into what we're going to be talking about today. Since, we have Sonali on the show as a leading psychologist, we're going to be talking about Bollywood. No, we're not. I'm sorry. That was a terrible joke. We're going to be talking about mental health and how we approach it as a society and as individuals. And we'll be doing that right after this break.
I want to thank Intel for supporting our show. We're all loving working from home, but let's be honest, there are complications to this. For example, getting help from IT folks if your PC is down can be a challenge because you can't just walk up to the IT support desk anymore to get your issue sorted out. Well, you'll be happy to hear that I have a solution for all your work from home pains. The Intel vPro platform. The platform comes packed with Intel Active Management technology that lets your IT teams remotely manage your system, fix the problems even when the PCs aren't near them, or are unresponsive, especially with the reduced desk site visits. So it means more time getting your work done and less time spent on getting support. What's more, the vPro platform also maximizes all your PC security, stability, and performance needs. Visit intel.in/more with vPro, that's VPRO, to discover how you can do more of what you want and less of what you don't. If you're listening on the IVM Podcast Android app, you will be able to click the link that's visible to you now.
And welcome back to another episode of Uncle Please Sit. My name, as always, is Tushar Abhichandani, and with me is Joel Pereira. And with us also is our special guest, Sonali Gupta. So Sonali, we've discussed a fair bit about what's happening in the pandemic and stuff, but I think a lot of times with mental health, actually, first of all, what is the appropriate terminology that we should be using? Are they called mental health issues? Are they called mental health problems? Are they called psychological issues? What is the appropriate terminology for this?
Yeah, because to be honest, I think I heard the phrase mental health for the first time maybe 5 years ago.
That is true.
Was it a phrase that existed before, maybe in academia or something like that?
So yes, I'm glad you're asking this. It has always existed. We are used to, as therapists, talking about it as mental health concerns. But you're spot on about the fact that in pop culture, in our vocabulary for people who are beyond academia, mental health hasn't existed as a term, or mental health concerns, or even now going to a therapist has also become something people talk on social media, right? And I think that's also something which has become a thing now. But the term mental health, the correct term, circling back to what you asked, it's mental health concerns, what people are struggling with. It could be mental health concerns. Some people also use the word problem. Some people use the word issues. I primarily say, what concerns are you struggling with? And, which may or may not have the term mental health into it. So any concerns that impact your emotional well-being or that comes in the way of your day-to-day living is a concern we would work around in therapy. Like, about 5 years back, I started working with a male client who just wanted to learn how to be far more compassionate in his day-to-day life, because one of his exes had said that you need to be far more sensitive and empathetic. And that was the ground that the person started.
So this is something that we actually wanted to jump into next. What are the kind of things that, as a mental health practitioner, that you deal with, as in that you help people with? And what does a general therapist help people with in general?
So, there could be a wide range. So it could begin with, one of the topmost concerns that a lot of people are reaching out during the pandemic, and even to some extent before the pandemic, was anxiety, where a lot of people feel very wired. So clients would say things like, I'm very overwhelmed. There is so much to do. I cannot go off to sleep. I'm consistently wired. I lie in bed at 12 until 2. I'm scrolling nonstop. And, I'm so wired that I don't end up sleeping. I end up procrastinating sleep. So, anxiety in various forms, whether it's about work, whether it's about relationship, panic attacks, those, that tops the list. The other concern is loneliness. A lot of people, at least in an urban setup like Bombay, where I am based out of, and, all of us are based out of, loneliness also tops the list, where people who are not in relationships, people who are in relationships, people who are married, all of them talk of loneliness. So couples talk about how they feel lonely on a weekend, even though they are with each other. And then people who are lonely, who are not with the partner, talking about loneliness. So loneliness has been another issue. And of course, then people reach for, concerns related to low mood, difficulty to regulate mood, depression. So there's a difference between depression and inability to regulate your mood. People would reach out for trauma-related work, if there's some kind of trauma that has happened in their life, workplace burnout. their struggle with their bosses, creative struggle. A lot of people I work with also talk about how they struggle creatively to, even during a pandemic to come up with content, right? It's so hard to look for inspiration in a time like pandemic if you're a creator. That is a real struggle at the end of the day. And then there are people who talk about relationship with parents, concerns to do with marriage. I remember I wrote in one of the Mumbai Mirror articles that one of my clients talked about the pressure to get married and said how the marriage has become like Aadhaar card almost for her. It's an Aadhaar card that everybody needs other than her. Everybody feels she should get married, but she doesn't feel the need to be married. So people reach out for relationship concerns. People reach out to talk about concerns with parents, siblings, and now in a pandemic about feeling claustrophobic, the fear of death, fear of infecting the virus. And I think the range is huge, the number of concerns that people reach out, sleep issues, eating problems, overeating, binge watching, a lot of them. I think we can spend the entire podcast if we just try and label all the
So also, I want to talk to you also about this. I see that there is a tendency amongst a lot of people where they look at a lot of these issues in isolation, in the sense that, like, for example, you are only depressed or you're only anxious. But from whatever I've seen, it's generally a mix of things that people are dealing with, right? Or like, is it generally just like specific, just small specific issues?
Honestly, it's never really specific. When it comes to most people who reach out for therapy, I use the term clients to refer to them. But most people who reach out, it's never that they may begin from a singular concern. But when we start working, we realize how it impacts a lot of other areas. So you are right about it. It's not really one concern. I also think the terms, are used very loosely often. Often people don't know what those terms mean and the intensity attached to it.
Okay.
You could be anxious and people could be different levels of anxious.
How much of this has been caused by pop culture? Because pop culture, the idea of therapy in pop culture is very like, you go to a therapist, you talk about some childhood things, and then you have this magical breakthrough, and then you're sorted.
No, you know what is my enduring image of therapy from pop culture? Like, especially Western pop culture, right? First of all, you have to sit on that weird chair, that weird recliner,
or the couch.
On that couch. And you have to face away from the therapist.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically you're looking at a wall and you're monologuing, and the therapist is behind you, and he or they have a notepad and they're taking notes. And the question that is always asked is, so what do you think about
it? Or how does that make you feel?
How does that make you feel? So obviously that's...
So Sonali, how accurate is the representation of therapy in pop culture?
So, I think Joel is spot on about it, in the sense that most people would walk into the, so I used to work out of Khar and South Bombay. Now I'm working from home, pretty much online sessions. But the image that people have is a psychoanalyst, what a psychoanalyst did. And that's what they used to do. And some of them still use that style. So in Bombay, the rentals are very steep. So to have a space that big enough to have a couch and then to be able to face away from the client, I don't have the luxury to have such a big space. And my car rentals were also steep towards South Bombay. And when people walk in, they're like, there's no couch. I'm like, no, there is no couch. I don't even take notes. I maintain eye contact. And then they say, oh, but you are smiling, aren't you supposed to be stiff and not smiling? I'm like, no, so I will, smile at you if you are talking. I would. They're like, you're not wearing specs. And, now people don't ask it, of course. But, people have these stereotypes where they would think, oh, why, this doesn't look like the so-called therapist in that sense. So I think these are presumptions, narratives that media has created. Most therapists don't fit into any of those. And I don't follow a psychoanalytic school, so maintaining eye contact is a huge part of therapy. I also don't largely take notes because I feel that every time you're taking notes, you're looking away from a client. So 16 years, I'm not really taken notes majority of it, like almost all of it, I've never really taken notes around it. But clients do walk in and will say, no couch, so what's the fun of it? Then I said, yeah, you will have to make do with what it is.
So, I have a small question. Okay. So now, like for instance, since we are children, I think a lot of the conversation over the past few years has been about equating mental health just like physical health. Like, at least in the PSAs that I've seen, it's like, a mental health is like a broken bone or a bacterial infection or a viral infection or what have you. Now, since we are like infants, right, we are taught to recognize symptoms of pain or symptoms of physical pain. Like, my stomach is hurting, or my leg feels weird, or my chest feels heavy, my throat is sore. How does one begin to identify that I even have these issues?
I know that analogy is used very often. I'm not sure if that analogy can describe all of mental health concerns. Because while the bone can be fixed, like when we talk about, let's say, anxiety, like I mentioned in my book, anxiety never goes away. You only learn to manage your anxiety and deal with it. So this analogy, I think, doesn't help after a point, because a lot of people think, like, how Tushar also made a mention, you go to a therapist and it will be fixed and dealt with. No, you can't. It's not fixed. There is not, there's not magic wand that I'm carrying and you talk about your problems and it will go away. Only the intensity of it comes down. So, that's the first part of it. And the second part, I think as children, and I think there's a gender difference also about how both men and women are conditioned in a certain way. But I think often when it comes to emotions like anger, when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to sadness, I think we are not told that we can learn to manage it as we grow up. We are told blanket statements like it's not good to get angry. No, but everybody gets angry, and you need to learn how to manage your anger. You need to learn how to be assertive, how to respond. But I think it's very important that people need to, as children are told that there are various emotions that serve purposes, like anger serves a purpose, anxiety serves a purpose, and it's important to learn what purpose does it serve. And I think what's most important is that schools, colleges, and parents need to teach children to listen to their body, right? Like, think of when, both of you are feeling angry, what would you feel in the body? Tell me, for example, where would you feel the anger in your body? If you're angry towards anyone, let's say.
I don't know, maybe
stomach, sometimes head.
Yes.
Definitely increased heart rate and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, chest also, yeah.
Absolutely. Like, even when, I would be getting angry, I would be feeling like there's a certain kind of, feeling that the face is going either red or around the ears, feeling that redness. I think it's also important to recognize where the emotions get stuck in the body and people to learn what happens to them, for children to learn when they are feeling that emotion. Because children often don't even have a language for sadness. Like, a lot of people will say that pit in the stomach. You feel that pit in the stomach before an important meeting, before a presentation, or, that's why children before an exam will have a stomach upset. Sometimes, because it's that early sign of anxiety. Or when when you are struggling with something, even as a teenager, when you're tossing and turning in your bed, there are signs of maybe there's something emotionally which is upsetting you. So I think it's important for parents and even for adults for us to have these conversations where we establish this link between the mind and the body.
I think because this is we're also at this point where, at least, okay, it's gotten slightly better now, but a lot of our general approach to depression and mental health and all these other issues has been कि बड़ा ये सब कुछ होता नहीं है. You just eat, just have some fun, and you will be fine. So it's like we've never, yeah, as you said, we've never sort of developed that vocabulary at all.
Absolutely. And I think, people will say things like, अरे क्या जरूरत है थेरेपिस्ट के पास जाने की, मेरे से बात कर लो, मेरे से बात करोगे, you can just come and talk to me, you will not even have to pay me for it and everything. You just pay. So I think there's a lens that, that these problems are not legit. I think a lot of time our culture promotes the narrative, and I feel, I am an elder millennial, as elder as millennials can possibly get. And I often feel that at least even while I was growing up, even the kids, who are now Gen Z, a lot of them have grown up with the feeling that they have been shamed by the society for their mental health symptoms. So society often shames them for their mental health symptoms. And I think circling back to what Joel asked, I think it's very important that we start from childhood, where people understand the legitimacy of, when to reach out for help, or even that it's okay to reach out for help. And I think, I don't know about both of you, but like nobody taught me how to be assertive in life. So, you did jobs, 16 years, started work at 23, you did jobs and you learned to be assertive in life, right? Or nobody taught saying how to regulate your mood. You work around it and you figure how to work around it, right? Eventually, and you learn it there.
So that's the thing, I think we were also talking about this before, where I've had this discussion a lot of times with my friends, because I mean, as you know, there's greater awareness about mental health and about how thought processes work and how emotions work. It's like, if somebody had, taught us about this in school or college, where if we had subjects or if we had good sort of guidance on this, I think a lot of the problems that a lot of us face would not have been as difficult or as painful as they were later on, because then later on you sort of found solutions to those problems, whether it was with regards to relationships or emotions or even the way you're supposed to behave in an office. Do you think we need like systematic mental health education from a very early age?
Absolutely. I feel that at a state level, at a policy level, we need textbooks, school textbooks, to integrate what good mental health looks like. What are some possible, signs or checklists that parents should look out for, that children should look out for? What does good mental well-being mean? Like, even in the context of pandemic, I would feel we need a guideline about how do parents and children manage screen time, right? Or when you have everything happening online. When is your child struggling with low moods, with bullying? What do you need to do about it? I think we need to have greater dialogues, A. B, I think this needs to be integrated at the school, college level. And it needs to be part of the syllabus rather than साल में एक बार you call a therapist and you say now the therapist will speak about it for 1 hour. That doesn't solve the problem at all, right? Like, you need a deep dive into it at the end of it. If you don't do a deep dive into it, people will not recognize that I can even talk about it. Like, one of the most common things I hear from people is, people will say that I didn't even know till the time I entered therapy that I was struggling with, let's say, high functioning anxiety, or that I was having a panic attack. People will say, I had no idea that what I had experienced was a panic attack. There was no vocabulary around it. So I think if it starts early on, at least, people will not have to suffer so much. I think a lot of people suffer far more because we don't even acknowledge this, right? It's this elephant in the room. Like, it's often, I remember when I was studying to be a therapist, and there's so many years back, when I would tell people that, I'm studying to be a therapist, there would be silence in the room. At a party or at a concert, and I was like, after a point, I was like, okay, maybe I should not tell people what I'm doing, because people would be like, can you read my mind? Were you thinking of what I was doing? Could you read it? I think we have such a huge misconception about mental health, about therapists, that we are doing a disservice, I think even now to some extent, to recognizing that there are problems, that need to be dealt. So while they are not like physical health problems, it's okay. All of us struggle with it. Your therapist also goes to therapy. So you need to remember those narratives.
Yeah. No, and
But what does, sorry, Tushar, you were saying.
No, so the thing with this is also that with this conversation growing, I often see that a lot of people are saying, "Arey yaar, you guys are talking too much about mental health, and you to make it sound like everybody has depression, everyone has anxiety." And I think my simple point to all of that is, no one's saying everyone has anxiety or whatever. It's just that all of us have some minor things. Some need therapy, some don't. But it's good to recognize that those issues exist, even if it's you feel bad once a week, like you feel slightly anxious once every couple of months. It's okay to just know about it. It's okay to just sort of know that these things exist. You don't necessarily have to go to therapy for it if you don't feel the need to. But that's the thing. It's like a lot of the stigma also now, because conversations are happening, I feel like sometimes there is an overreaction to the conversation. Like, why is this conversation happening so much?
So I think because we are trivializing the problem, so people don't know, there's a dialogue in Truman Show. Have you watched Truman Show?
Yeah.
The Jim Carrey movie.
Yeah.
So, in the end, he says, you never had a camera in my head, because, and I think people often forget this in the context of other people struggling. We never have a camera inside someone's head, right? So we don't know how much another person is struggling.
Yeah.
I think also, second thing to remember is, some of my clients who come to therapy would tell me that there is nobody who I can talk to about what I'm struggling with. So, let's say if they have a conflict or if they have problems in their marriage or with their parents, their concern is also that I need a safe space to talk about things. So while my problem is not the biggest in the world, whether I'm not in a crisis, I need an objective third person perspective on it. So people also need to remember that a lot of people who make it to therapy also are sometimes coming because you may struggle with your close friends, you may struggle with your partner, with your parents, with your boss. And it may be okay to reach out to someone who's not involved in your life, right? Who's, that transaction nature of it also helps somewhere to be objective and for you to get some feedback there.
Sure.
Does that answer what you had to ask, Tushar?
Yeah.
No, actually, I was going to talk about the stigma actually, because I guess that's, again, you said you are a very, very senior millennial. I think the both of us also are in the same, like we all are. And so I guess our childhood experiences would be similar, but people did not start referring to mental health issues sympathetically, I would say, till about 8-9 years ago. And
the term often was like, "Arey, tu pagal ho gaya kya? Why do you need to go to a psychologist?" Like it was,
which is such an ironic question. And but there were all these things about. So, for instance, if anyone found out that anyone was going to a therapist or seeing a psychiatrist or seeing a counselor of any kind, it was always assumed that there was something seriously wrong. That this person was. I think the fear was that this person who has to seek mental health help is fundamentally unbalanced and hence untrustworthy. How do you think that that stigma has the stigma reduced? Would you say, or is it just in our internet circles that everyone talks about this stuff?
So I think two ways. So absolutely the stigma has reduced. At the same time, I think we all are still part of those internet privileged worlds, right? Where there is far more openness than before. But I think the very fact that we are discussing mental health, there is access in various ways, helplines exist. Now there's at least a greater acknowledgement of, mental health issues. And you're spot on about the fact, Joel, that it's only last 8-9 years where people have started talking about it so much, openly. But even now, I think people who knows about who goes for therapy is still very personal. Like people will tell their friends about it. Some of my clients will say, all my friends know I'm in therapy, but my parents don't know I'm in therapy. Or there are people, and I think in the last 7 to 9 years, with technology coming in, with the work culture becoming far more, longer in the context of how people are working, all of it, I think there's a significant change in how therapists and psychiatrists are being looked at. And now far more men also reach out for therapy in the last few years as compared to before. So even the gender balance somewhere has changed in the last few years. But part of the stigma is still very much there. I don't think it's fully gone. And addressing what you asked about, even now people will ask me that, are these people who don't have any social support, are these people having massive breakdowns? I'm like, I work with a huge population that's very highly functional. So a lot of these people are not having breakdowns. A lot of people are also in therapy to improve their quality of living. They are in therapy sometimes to preemptively deal with the problem. Like some of my older clients who have struggled with anxiety or mood will even send their children for therapy, saying that it's good for them, before they go abroad to do a session. Or sometimes people will say that, I'm struggling with, let's say, with social media addiction, and I need to learn how to manage it better. So I don't think, reaching out, in fact, for therapy is a sign of strength rather than a weakness. And I think we as a society are still coming to terms with it. I think we are still far away in the concept of understanding that it's not just the weak who reach out for therapy. And I think that still needs far more work there.
Also, since you mentioned people going to psychologists and psychiatrists, we need to clear one more thing. A lot of people confuse what the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. Can you clear that for us?
Yes, absolutely. So, that's a most commonly asked, thing. So a psychologist is generally a mental health practitioner who has done their graduation, post-graduation in psychology, clinical psychology, counseling psychology, and they come from that background where they're trained to help people deal with their problems through a process of facilitation. The psychiatrist, on the other hand, is a doctor, who has done their MBBS and then their MD in psychiatry. And the psychiatrist is qualified to administer medication. So let's say whether it's medication for anxiety, for depression, for bipolar, whether it's medication for poor sleep, and the psychologist doesn't administer medication. Also, psychologists and the psychiatrist often work together in a lot of cases to help. Yeah, they often work together to help the client better. So if I have a client who's struggling, let's say, with any of the concerns I mentioned, if I feel that the client's, let's say, anxiety is extremely high, the client may need medication, I may refer them out to a psychiatrist where I will give them the history, and then the psychiatrist can figure if the client needs medication or not. And then we work in tandem so that the client's progress can be mapped out, so that holistically we look at the problem from a psychologically, physiologically, neurotransmitter levels, all of it.
Also, since you mentioned medication, I hear this with a lot of people who are open to going to a psychologist, who are open to the idea of therapy. A lot of times when it comes to medication, they have this insane fear about like, I can't take medication. Once I start, how will I stop? So, just why is there such a massive stigma around like medication? Because from, again, whatever I've read, medication is very helpful when it's done right.
Yes, I think one is people don't know enough about how does psychiatric medication work. Second, Second, I think people also struggle with, now people will go online and search for the name of the medication, the side effects.
Yeah.
They will also search for, is it dependent? Does it create, they'll say, will it create an addiction of its own kind? So I think it's important to remember that as a patient, as a client, you have a right to ask your psychiatrist about all the side effects. Will you get dependent on the medication? And also each psychiatrist will tell you that there is a process for a client to be weaned off medication. One, that. Second, let's say if somebody is struggling with 2 weeks of not sleeping. Okay. Now 2 weeks of barely sleeping, poor sleep, or if it's 2 weeks of not sleeping at all, then it's way too much. I think a person cannot take that. But let's say even if you don't sleep for 3-4 days and you don't get any sleep, you can talk to a therapist, but you may also need to talk to a psychiatrist, because not sleeping, staying away for so many days is going to impact you. And as a psychologist, I wouldn't be able to address it if a client is not sleeping for 4 days straight, 3 days straight, where they're sleeping just intermittently 2 hours. They may need to see a psychiatrist. Also, if they're having panic attacks consistently, if their mood is so low where they can't get out of bed, let's say, then, if you can't get out of bed, you can't even make it to therapy session. Then you may need to go through medication first and maybe then think of therapy, right? So there are a lot of situations where medication is very, very important to begin with. It's not, and I think, we need to work towards also talking about how the medication works, building a vocabulary also about what the medication does.
Is it true that a lot of the stigma is maybe coming from the fact that people think that psychiatric medicine or mental health medication is something that will, that's some sort of weird mind-altering substance that will make you feel weird or loopy or whatever, which I personally find a little weird, considering I've had many injuries in my life, and I have taken some painkillers and some muscle relaxants that have that I would not mind doing on a Friday night, if you know what I mean.
So I think, people will ask things like, they will say, if I take this medication, do you think that the ideas will not come at the same pace that they generally come to me? I'm like, you are feeling low. So you need to, more than low, you are struggling with depression, and it may be important to help you deal with it. But people will have often narratives of, as you said, they feel that their mind will be fully altered. Their creativity will be taken away. They feel that they will, will their enthusiasm go away? So people often end up asking a lot of those things. The reality is that the psychiatric medication helps to manage your neurotransmitter levels. So, it may be important for you to learn to manage your mood, and, it is important. That's why people feel that it's going to alter your brain to ask things. Like I always tell clients that don't assume what a drug will deal with this. But there are enough misconceptions about it.
And we this is one part that actually I forgot to ask you before. You mentioned psychoanalysis. Can you sort of when someone comes to a therapist, what are the various kinds of options available to them in terms of the kinds of therapy available?
So different therapists, there are different schools of therapy, psychotherapy that exist. So there's psychoanalysis, what Joel was speaking about, where you're not facing the therapist, you're on the recliner on the couch. That's psychoanalysis. That's how therapy started with Sigmund Freud, right? And I'm sure all of you have heard of Sigmund Freud, right?
Yeah.
So he was the one, with whom therapy, who kind of originated the entire process of what therapy looks like. That's how the process started. And, there are other schools, like there is the school I follow is humanistic existential based school, which is a non-directive school. By non-directive, I mean I would not ask very directed, pointed things to clients. I create a space where people find their own answers. I am also far more gentler in my approach, where I'm okay with people pacing themselves. Like therapy moves at a pace that the client wants it to move. I also deeply believe that each client has their own answer. And from an existential position, you believe, like, there are principles that I would believe is that, we are born into a world where there's not so much meaning, and all of us at some stage will struggle to find meaning. And that's why at 20s, meaning making looks like something else. At 30s, it will look like something else. And now when we are going to enter our 40s, already in our 40s, it's going to look very differently. So there's that school of thought that exists there. So, where I'm okay with people pacing themselves, people taking their time. And I've always believed people will find their own answers, and all clients do manage to find their own answers. Then there are other schools of thoughts like Gestalt, cognitive behavioral, rational behavioral therapy, CBT, what is known as, where the focus is on understanding the mind, on understanding what your thoughts are primarily. While I am humanistic and existential in my approach, I'm also eclectic, where I use bits from all of this. Like there's so much work that Freud did that is still applicable today. And so I'll pick parts of Freud's work that work, like, Freud talked about unconscious. So like when you're analyzing a dream, sometimes you will look at that. So you could integrate various approaches. So when somebody comes to therapy, I would run them by a quick, over the call, the first call itself, that where am I coming from, for them to understand what the session looks like. I primarily do a 60-minute session, which is an hour of a session. And different therapists will have different lengths. Some will do a 45, 50-minute session. So people have different lenses around it. Does that answer what you were asking?
Yeah, pretty much.
And, because again, right, there's a lot of misconception about therapy, about any kind of therapy, whether it's psychological or psychiatric, that, like, there's that one thing about where you will be facing a wall. Then there's others, I think a lot of people, maybe this is my personal example, or maybe it's just anecdotal, but there's also a bit of fear for going to a mental health professional, considering that, people believe that maybe their brains are, have reached some sort of balance, and a therapist will push it off, and push them into a certain direction. Do you think that's a common belief?
So, so one is, everybody who comes to do even the first session for therapy or makes the first call, they are in a way, anxious. So people will call me and will say, listen, I'm so anxious, I don't even know what to ask you really. So, so because I think people don't understand the process, right? People don't know what happens in that 1 hour session there. And when people enter a therapy session, some people will say like, okay, so tell me what is to be done. What are the ground rules here? Run me by a structure. Because I think often people, it's like right behind the doors kind of thing, right? Like, you may have seen it in pop culture, and a lot of what we see in pop culture is often not correct. Also, it's also misrepresented in a big way. And I think that feeling, that anxiety, and I think also clients walk into sessions thinking that therapists are mind readers. So I have to often tell people, okay, it's an irrational thought. I can't read your mind. I have a sense, I have an understanding of human behavior, but it's not that I can read minds, I can figure what you're thinking. It's not that I am better than you. We both are at the same level, right? There is no hierarchy. No matter whether my client, I don't work with children now, but earlier, I would. Whether I work with a child, whether I work with, like, my oldest client in therapy is about almost 80. So whether it's an 80-year-old client or whether it's a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old, there is no hierarchy. I can't know you as much as you know yourself. You are the best judge of yourself. So I think often when people come into therapy, how I work at least, and I think different therapists have different styles, I generally try and create an environment where people feel at comfort, at peace with themselves. And they learn to trust the fact that they can tell me things and we can slowly work towards it. At the same time, we are on the same page and there is no hierarchy here. So the minute it becomes hierarchy, it's a power struggle there again. I think the moment the power struggle is taken away, people can be far more vulnerable in the therapy, process. And connecting to what you said, Joel, that, once they feel that they can be far more vulnerable, I think then you start talking about your concerns without a sense of shame or without a sense of judgment. But it's a long process, because I think talking about your vulnerabilities, talking about, like clients would say that I don't like myself, I hate myself, or the fact that why am I not a morning person, or the fact that, how can I spend 4 hours on Instagram just when I was going to sleep. To a lot of people, these may seem like things that only they are struggling with. And sometimes, like I'll tell clients that this is most commonly discussed in therapy. So I think sometimes that just almost makes them feel like they are not the only one who are struggling. Does that answer, Joel, what you had in mind?
Yeah, mostly. But no. What I was saying is that there is, again, this is from pop culture, that people will be sitting in therapy and they will unlock. Okay, so let me just simplify this entire question. Is mental health issues always or mostly always trauma based?
No, they are not always trauma based, and you can't be sitting in a session, and there are some sessions where you will have breakthroughs, where there's a massive insight that will come to you.
Of course, yeah.
A lot of times, majority of the time, people work for a long time in therapy, and the change will come at a time where both the client and I don't know when the change actually came. Like, I'll give an example. I used to work with somebody who was struggling with grief, abandonment to do with a relationship issue with their partner. And for a couple of years, they would keep talking about their partner, take the partner's name. In one session, for the first time, this client of mine said, so this is 1 week I have not thought of my ex. Now, this statement, the person referred to the partner as an ex. They didn't think about it. And so while you look at it, it seems like that, okay, this week is the week when the client got better. But there was 2 years of work that we did that led up to it. But only the client and I know that, somebody who never says ex and now suddenly says, now I don't think of my ex, that's a massive thing. You're suddenly stopped using the name and you're referring to them as ex. So, and also they are not always trauma related. There are a lot of people who will work in therapy to get better perspective. So I have some clients who will say, I just need a new perspective on this problem. I need, I need to figure, I'm going to get, like a client I work with, recently reached a very senior position, where they're going to be heading an organization, all of it. And they said, I want to work in therapy so that I can balance my family and my work. There is no trauma, there is no crisis. This is a positive event. The client said, my worry is that my work should not consume me.
Do positive events also lead to mental health issues?
Absolutely. So, like I said about this senior manager, this person heading the organization, there are other people who will reach out for therapy when they're about to get married. And they will say, while I'm very, excited about the marriage, but I have mixed feelings towards it. So marriage is often an event which is mixed. It's not all positive. You also feel anxious, like I remember feeling I'm marrying someone, who I love. And there was still this feeling that you're entering a new world. You're going to be living with someone. I don't know what it's going to be like. Also, other positive events like let's say, having a child, for example, moving into a new house. All these events, while they can be positive, they can be very anxiety provoking. Also, when think about it from, like people in the creative stream often struggle with that. Suddenly, when they will have fame, they will often say, I don't know what to do with this fame. I don't know what to do, how people are interpreting or perceiving me. Having so much fame and eyeballs is not also the nicest, right?
Yeah.
People's perception changes, and in a creative industry. So even positive events often lead to people, reaching out. And just ending with what Joel asked, it's not often trauma, and that's why it's a misconception. Trauma may be one of the things people reach out for, but people will reach out for positive issues. People will also reach out for when they are struggling with a friendship. And they don't, like, I have a lot of men and women in therapy who are in therapy, and they talk about how to deal with subtle, gentler issues with friends, with their close friends, and they don't know who they can talk about it.
Also, do you also experience this, like, for example, like just we discussed the positive event situation, do you also see a lot of high functioning people who on the surface seem like they are doing perfectly all right, but then they have issues and they come to you or to other therapists or other psychologists, psychiatrists? So how does that play out in general?
I think mostly, I'm sorry, but I just had to say this, but I think most of the time, Tushar, what you're talking about, like high functioning people and suffering from mental health issues, I think most of the time it comes out in very tragic ways, no? When like something horrible happens to the person, either an attempt, at taking their own life, or a breakdown or something like that. And the question is, they seem fine, or how can that be? How can they be depressed? I think that is what I want to just like get some perspective on.
That's the higher spectrum of it, but the whole range, I guess, is a.
Yeah, so I think both those are valid. They come in both those forms. So one is, let me begin with maybe what Joel said. So a lot of times people think that mental health issues are invisible. You never know who's struggling, right? So one of my clients would say, listen, nobody who comes up, so the sessions are separate by 20 minutes. But if a client bumped into another client or they ended up seeing them, they would say, but nobody looks sick. No, nobody looks like they're struggling. I'm like, even if the other person sees you, they don't think you're struggling or going through something. So one is that. The second is, I think often as a society, or if we look at it culturally or in the mainstream, when people have these attempts or when somebody has a breakdown, society or media will focus on it, right? And then they will say, oh, this person seems so high functional. So that's one way it comes out. The other is, the high functional people will also come for therapy. I work with a lot of them, and they'll come because a dermatologist referred saying a client has, let's say, urticaria, or they have a skin problem. And the dermatologist has put a note saying, I think it is stress induced. Or at another point, like a gastro will, make a referral to me, who I don't even know, and will say IBS or constipation is a function of larger stress. So, so they will reach out for physical concerns sometimes there. And there are other times where a person will reach out, like high functional individuals will reach out saying, I have an imposter syndrome. I think I'm not doing anything in life. I am not good enough. Or, there are other people who have reached out to me and said, I am just unhappy in life. So while everybody thinks that I'm happy, I'm achieving so much, earning an X amount, having this much fame, people like me, people think everything in my life is hunky-dory, a lot of high functional people will reach out saying they are unhappy. And, for at least for high functional anxiety, what I've seen and what I can say about based on my work, which I also mention in the book, is they will say things like they struggle with imposter syndrome, where it's hard for them to believe that They will say things like, it's just luck, it's just fluke, it just happened to me. Also, some high functioning people find it very hard to stop working. So sometimes they will reach out in therapy because their partner will say, I can't stay with you in a marriage or relationship because you're constantly at work. And at other times, high functional people will also, they may have, like, let's say, sleeping issues, inability to, like, to stop work. They are so wired consistently, or as a result of which, sometimes also when they have had some degree of dependence, when they feel that they are not using healthy mediums to cope with their anxiety, and they are consistently feeling overwhelmed. Does that answer what both of you had in mind?
That pretty much covers.
Yeah.
So I also, the thing I've realized with mental health is it can also be sort of cost prohibitive treatment for mental health issues. And especially because, like, for example, unlike a lot of other medical conditions where you go to the doctor 2-3 times, you take medication and it gets better or it's managed or whatever. But with mental health, like, for example, with therapy, you have to come in for maybe 1 month or 6 months or 3 months. So what does a person do when sort of affordability becomes an issue? Because your mental health issue is not going away. So you need to find a way to sort of treat it or deal with it. And from whatever I've read, therapy rates can range anywhere from like 500 rupees an hour to 10,000 rupees an hour, depending on where you are and who your therapist is. So according to you, how can people cope in such situations where are there helplines? Are there NGOs helping with this, or like what kind of stuff can people do to deal with this?
So, I think, as you said, therapists can charge anywhere from 500 to a session to maybe in India, a lot of people would, it wouldn't go to as much as a 10,000 an hour for a session. It would be, I think there would be a lot of people who would charge maybe from 500 to, let's say, about 4 to 4.5 is what a lot of people would charge. And there may be a lot of people who charge 5, not lot, but there may be a small amount who charge 5 or 6,000. And a session also, they charge that degree of fee also. So I think to begin with, and even the psychiatrist could be charging as little as 500 to be about 5,000 a session or 6,000 a session. So that's what it is. And maybe if there are, and possibly, I don't know, there are therapists who also charge higher than this, and I don't know of that. It may be important when you reach out to a therapist, ask things like, this is what I'm struggling with. And what do you think, about, do you think I'm going to take months do you think it would need long-term work when there's trauma? Sometimes it's not few months, it may take a year or more to deal with it. So A, begin by asking that. B, it's important to be realistic about what's the budget you can afford in the long run, one. Second, it's important to ask yourself if you can, go to a therapist for whose budget you can afford in the long run without resentfulness. If you start feeling that, if you are struggling with something massive and you can't pay the therapist fees, it's okay to look out for other therapists. So that's one. The second way is, if you can't afford therapy at all, so, if it's not possible because of financial reasons, or because you are not earning, or because there's no therapist in your city also, it's important to reach out to a lot of helplines. There are a lot of helplines that exist, and all of them are free. Like iCall, TISS, iCall being one. Third is, a lot of people also look at now, I run a YouTube channel and I did a video on how can people manage anxiety in Hindi. And that video ended up having like million views, over it. And I realized that for so many people, they are using also YouTube to try and figure out, to even identify a problem and to understand sometimes to begin with what they can do there. Okay. And and when people started writing to me, I would direct them to helplines or I would direct them to a crowdsource list. Also, the fourth last thing is, even when I wrote the book on anxiety, we made a conscious choice to, put the book pricing at 299, which during a sale will go to a 200 or even a lower amount, like on a Kindle as little as 100 sometimes, because the book is not a substitute for therapy. So I am not saying it's offering substitute for therapy at all, but it's a toolkit for people to at least recognize they are struggling with the problem. What can they do immediately to soothe themselves, to manage themselves? So I think the mental health, the therapy lens needs to also widen in that context, where you look at affordability from various perspectives. And you also look at, lastly, NGOs, psychiatrists, all therapists also do pro bono work, sliding rate, you have a sliding scale. So ask your therapist about it. Also do it via an NGO. So, I remember back in the day, I used to work with an NGO where you would see clients do early some degree of work and you would barely charge people, around it. So figure different narratives, because there are these choices available at the end of the day. And ask your therapist about the sliding scale. Ask them that can they lower the price? What is their pro bono work? Every therapist has a certain amount of, not every therapist, but a lot of therapists, you have certain amount of clients. Like if a client has lost their job, I would tell them that, okay, how do you navigate it? It differs from client to client, of course. But ask these to your therapist. It's important things to ask, and even to a psychiatrist. Like I know psychiatrists who have told clients that, okay, you're struggling with it, come and do a consult and you can pay what you want.
Okay.
Or we have done an emergency call I'll take with somebody who's just struggling with a massive issue, and that's fine. If they can't pay, they were struggling, you just do that call because it is a massive challenge for someone.
So there are a bunch of
options.
So there are a bunch of options that we could. Also, does in India, and I don't know, even in the US, does insurance cover therapy sessions?
In the US, the insurance covers therapy sessions. In India, as of now, insurance doesn't cover it. Some companies may make their own policy where they choose to pay therapists, pay their, pay the employees for the therapy sessions they take. So some companies may do, but insurance doesn't cover in India as of now.
Okay. Also, since you mentioned the book, do tell us more about your book on anxiety.
So yes, I wrote the book primarily because, I felt anxiety tops as one of the concern. And, the conversation we started with, where Joel said around, 7-8 years back, the mental health term came into, greater light. My understanding is from 12 to 2013 to now, the kind of concerns that people were reaching out to me suddenly changed. So anxiety became much higher. So the book talks about 3 areas. So the book talks about what does anxiety look like? So, like I asked both of you, where do you feel the anxiety in the body? So the book talks about how, what is high functioning anxiety? Where do you feel the anxiety? The second, the book talks about what are various ways which our anxiety manifests. Is it at the workplace? Is it to do with relationship? Is it to do with technology? Or is it to do with loneliness? And the last area, the last segment of the book is what can you do emotionally to managing anxiety immediately in the short term, in the long run. So the book is a toolkit. While it's not a substitute for therapy, as I mentioned earlier to your question, Tushar, it's not a substitute, but it is a toolkit where I'll talk about what can you do in a panic attack? What do you not do in a panic attack? I tell people I talk about in the book about how one can be self-compassionate, be kinder to oneself. How can we learn to emotionally soothe oneself? Instead of maybe binge, like one of the things, I often keep hearing in therapy session is also, which is part of the book also, is like clients would say that they would watch Friends, Big Bang Theory, almost on a loop to quieten their mind. So when the thoughts are like running really fast, they would watch these shows to quieten their mind. So in the book, I talk about that while you may be using some of that, what are some other ways that you can use to soothe your anxiety? Also, how do you deal with your burnout? I have had a burnout, and when I had my burnout, I came up with this term called pause rituals. So, I'm very systematic, organized in the way I work. And I realized when I had my own burnout about 7 years back that the only way I'll really pause in life is if I build a pause in my diary, in my schedule. So I came up with the term pause ritual, which basically means that I have time in the day when I don't look at the phone, I don't look at any gadget, and I just monotask. And by monotasking, I also mean that I just relax. So if I'm going for a walk, I will just go for a walk. I won't do anything else. It's a pause ritual. If I'm reading, I'm only reading. So I worked around pause ritual, and the book talks about that also. So the book talks about what people can do.
It's a fairly comprehensive guide in a way.
Yes, as a toolkit. Yes.
So before
Sonali,
we end this,
one last bit of question that I had. I don't know. Maybe this is maybe it's a dumb sounding question, but considering that again, referring back to what is the popular conception of mental health. People have this idea, a lot of people have this idea that basically depression means that this person needs to be weeping all the time. Or a panic attack means that this person is behaving like, is behaving very dramatically, or maybe shouting or screaming or whatever. Or various mental health issues find their physical manifestations in very dramatic ways, which obviously, if you're going to put it in a movie, it has to be like that. But does it make any sense to publicize the symptoms of mental health? Like how, now we're in the middle of a pandemic and people are always saying, if you're feeling breathless, or if you're feeling so-and-so, you might have corona. Right. So does it make sense for mental health professionals to start talking about this? Because I didn't know it myself, that what are the symptoms of anxiety? What are the symptoms of, say, depression or panic or whatever, mental health issues?
So absolutely, I don't think there is anything like a dumb question or a stupid. So I think it's a very valid one. And, in the book, so I think it makes sense to talk about symptoms, because sometimes when you talk about it, people realize that, okay, depression can also look this way, anxiety can also look this way. So there could be somebody who's depressed who's still going to work, because as we talked about, there could be intensity of where you are on the spectrum for any illness in that sense, right? So there could be somebody who you meet at office every day and you wouldn't even know that they are struggling with depression, right? And there are a lot of people who may not be crying, but their symptoms may be that they don't get sleep, they cannot concentrate, they are losing weight, they are gaining weight for others. There are others who can maintain a smile with you, but they feel they have no interest in anything that they do. Or, in the book, I make a mention of how anxiety gets physically stuck in the body. So whether it's headaches, backaches, so 4 areas that anxiety gets stuck is the head, in the form of headaches, backache, stomach, all stomach related issues. Like, even Tushar said that when you feel anger, it's the stomach. So stomach related issues and skin. So I describe it in the book. The number of readers who have reached out to me and said, I didn't know I was experiencing anxiety. Because for the longest time, they confused whether it's a headache, whether it's a skin condition, whether it's this consistent pit in the stomach, or, when you feel your throat, you feel choked, right? You feel something in your throat when you're feeling anxious. That's how anxiety gets stuck. So it makes sense to talk about it. Also, you could be on a flight with a lot of people and there could be somebody having a panic attack and they are just clutching to their seat. They may not be saying anything, or they are saying the prayer 1,000 times in their head and they may be having a panic attack. So I think it makes sense. And like in the book also, I've talked about making the invisible signs visible, because when you make it visible, there's a legitimacy to a larger conversation. You know, people will say, oh, I didn't even know that somebody who's anxious could also be manifesting in the form of pit in the stomach, or that feeling of palpitation, or, you know, like people will have sweaty palms, numbness, or tingling sensation. And a lot of them is anxiety sometimes. But people will not even know about it at the end of the day. So it is important to talk about it. I think also, you know, we are living at this very odd time, like, you know, I was telling Tushar also when we were speaking briefly, where mental health sadly has been reduced to hashtag mental health. You know, it's, you know, I think it's important it's important to ask, who are you reaching out for the right information? You know, reach out to a psychologist, reach out to a psychiatrist when it comes to asking about what do symptoms look like. You know, we don't want mental health from stigma to, we don't want it to move to a time where everybody is talking about it. And, you know, when everybody says that my DMs are open, you can talk to me or you can write to me, the reality is a lot of times people may not be trained really to be able to talk, to be able to listen to someone who's struggling with mental health, right? With mental health concerns, you know, because so talking about that training is also equally important at that stage.
All right, I think this has been a very enlightening session for both of us. I think you've covered so much ground, which we didn't think we would cover in like an hour and 15 minutes. So, Sonali, thank you so much for coming. And thank you so much for sharing all your insights. And before we go, I just want to say, if you like this podcast, don't forget to check out our other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. Sonali, your social media handles are?
Yes, so on Instagram, it's Mental Health with Sonali. On Twitter, it's Gupta Sonali.
Okay. Yes. And your YouTube?
Yeah, my YouTube is again Mental Health with Sonali. That's what the channel is.
All right,
and Joel, thank you so much. Yeah,
sorry. Joel, what's your social media handle?
On Twitter, I am Pereira Joel. On Instagram, I am joelpereira.esq.
And I am Yono Please on Twitter and Tushar_Abhi on Instagram. And Sonali, thank you so much for coming by and thank you for this great session.
Thank you, Sonali. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for hosting me, and I had a lot of fun, and I'm glad we could do this.
Great.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Intel, for supporting us. Great week on the network. If you haven't been listening, why haven't you been listening? You should be listening. Rohan Joshi was on Uncle Please Sit, discussed the toxicity of the Indian pop culture. Really fun conversation to listen to. Rajiv Samant, the founder of Sula Wines, was on Cyrus Says. Again, I think that was a fun conversation. Also want to call out the season finale of Yuddha. Yuddha is our military history podcast. Definitely do check that out. It's a really great listen. And finally, I want to just remind you all that, you know, it's a dark time, but if you need a smile, go check out the Smile India podcast by Shifa Mehta. It's in both English and Hindi, and I think that you will really enjoy the kinds of things that she's talking about there. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Sachin Tendulkar, Virat Kohli, Don Bradman, and now Cyrus Brocha. Okay, probably not in the right company. I mean, Don Bradman is Australian. But it's called Cyrus Says, a wonderful show about everything. Find the show on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts.